Welcome to the segment I like to call It's Just Information, where you don't have to do anything with what I say, but you can think about it or not. And today's topic is all around noticing the difference between, hey, am I overstimulated or am I avoidant? We live in a society where labels and categories and disorders and boxes and hierarchies are at everybody's fingertips. Attachment styles are helpful, but they don't necessarily explain everything. Okay, there's nuance. In some cases, it's informative, but in other cases, it can be very harmful. When it comes to our access to one another, whether directly or indirectly, it can be overstimulated. It can be overwhelming, and maybe you just shut down. To other people, it might seem like you are avoidant. But what if you are just overstimulated? And now this information is really going to take you being very honest with yourself, because there might be people out there who may not want to label themselves as avoidant and instead, hey, I'm just overstimulated. But see, the thing about being overstimulated doesn't mean that you lack the ability to communicate and or hold yourself accountable in terms of how you're showing up in a relationship. But it can still mean that you were burned out. Sometimes we are so inundated with information, responsibilities, relationships that sometimes our body and our mind are just not congruent. They're not communicating with each other. And what happens is we experience a level of burnout. Okay, what does burnout actually look like? Well, a lot of times it's a fogginess in thought. It's a lack of motivation in terms of how you're showing up in spaces. Your inability to stay consistent is not always about just being tired or sleepy. It can simply be about your motor skills starting to run a little slower than usual. And for some people, they may not have the communication skills to just necessarily speak up. So what do? They check out. But let's be clear that to be overstimulated isn't always the same thing as being avoidant. Okay, when a person is avoidant or operating in that space, they dodge emotional connection, they dodge vulnerability, right? They are avoiding anything that feels like a breach on their independence, okay? Because it's registering to them as a lack of safety. But to be overstimulated can just simply mean, hey, I'm tapped out. There have been times I've definitely been exhausted, right? Because there's so many things going on. And I'll say to a person like, man, I'm gassed. I don't really have much left in the tank. But I'm still able to communicate to them, hey, this is what's going on. Doesn't mean that I want to deny the relationship with them or I'm fearful of the relationship with them. No. It just means that, hey, I don't really have much energy right now. A lot of times a person can be perceived as anxious because they are feeling insecure in their relationship, right? There's a lack of communication. There's a deviation in the natural pattern of how things used to go, and this person may be desiring communication, and now they're being perceived as insecure or anxious. Hey, maybe this person is, withholding communication, withholding information, or just not behaving in the ways that they used to, and now that's causing a discrepancy in how we usually flow. Like I said, when it comes to being avoidant, that's not so much about just being overstimulated. There are other components that are added onto it. A person who is very secure can also feel very overstimulated. And when they are overstimulated, they may not have the capacity to function in that moment, right? The ways that they used to. Okay, we want to look more at the consistency of a pattern versus isolated incidents. A person that is overstimulated, they may not last in that space for an extended period of time. It just may be momentary. You'll know by how they are willing to communicate that, if they have the capabilities, or just how they step back into space and hold themselves accountable. See, a lot of times, even when we are overstimulated, there's still responsibility we have to return to the relationship. I just really want to apologize for how checked out I've been. There's just been so much fogginess going on in my head, and I've just been trying to regroup. In our relationships, we can recognize when we may be a little bit off kilter. How are we willing to show up after that, right? A person that's avoidant won't be willing to address that conversation much or at all, versus somebody who is just overstimulated. Hey, this is isolated. Just let you know, I'm going through these things and I'm just trying to sort through it and process it. Are you really overstimulated? Are you more avoidant leaning? Okay. And in this world that is constantly bombarding us with obligations and tasks, okay, and hustle culture. What does it actually look like for you on a day-to-day basis? You don't have to agree. Just sit with it. Or maybe pass it along to someone else. But don't forget to breathe. If you like this kind of information, like, comment, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your family. And I'll see you back here. It's just information.